can't be hypnotized or properly conditioned for
I just got the promotion status that was added to it, but that was a
Okay.
couple of years ago. But I did recently go to the school that's needed for that promotion.
What was it? And what was the promotion?
The promotion is to the next rank of staff sergeant.
So Staff Sergeant Kelly.
Yes, that I'm not there yet.
Okay. So, but did I pronounce that correctly?
You did, yes.
Okay. You're military. I'm always afraid I'm gonna like mispronounce someone's like status and they're gonna beat me up.
No, you're fine. It's the most I've had with complications is trying to explain how the military organization works in a civilian mindset
And why
of
do you
trying
think
to
that
explain
is?
it that way.
And why do you think that is?
Because a lot of the lingo and the military terms that we use, it doesn't correlate to civilians unless they've been associated in some way with the military. It goes over their head. So in a way, it's like we learn two languages. You have English and then you have military lingo.
So it's kind of like English and then hypnotist lingo.
Basically, yes.
What justifies being able to or not being able to reveal yourself?
That would depend on the level of classification that's going on. And it would also depend on the degree of what you're talking about something. And it's all predetermined beforehand. Some of it is unclassified, but controlled information. And depending on how much that gets out, how much that leaks, it can turn it up to the next classification level, which would be secret. And then you go into top secret.
Whether you're in or out, do you still have to go back to your higher ups and basically ask for permission to speak to a certain level about a topic, even if you aren't actually in? So, for example, I know I was just listening to an interview, and Andrew Bustamante, who's an ex-CIA officer, said that he worked on a project with someone, and they gave the general idea of the project to his old higher ups at the CIA, because I guess it sounded like he had a lifelong contract saying you're not allowed to talk about this or the other. And they're like, yeah, the concept looks great. I think you could probably pull this off. Yeah, you got permission. You got to go. They did 6 months of the project, and they said, boom, here's the final project. And they looked at it and said, this is never going to see the light of day. And they realized they just spent 6 months on something they can no longer share. Even though you're not in the CIA, but you're still in the military, is that true for you guys as well?
In some cases, it depends on the level of security of somebody's job that they have and the organization that they're a part of, that they can't share certain things. Obviously, CIA, SEAL teams, Navy SEAL teams, Rangers, all of those specific special forces, all of them, they have their own missions that they complete and execute, that they're going to be held for non-disclosure degree agreements. But for me and myself, when I eventually leave the military, then I will be able to talk about a lot of my experiences. Yes. And some of them I can still share, but it depends on the group and media that's offering.
Do they teach, if I remember correctly, do they teach like basic BJJ, or what is taught in basic combat training?
What is taught is listening to your drill sergeant. That is the number one rule. It's what the recruiters drilled into me, and it's what the drill sergeants drill into me, because they don't want you to fail, because that is money that is lost. They will do everything in their power to make you pass, even if it takes multiple attempts, which they're not necessarily allowed to do, but they will do their very best to pass you. The only way you'll fail is if you give up. And that's even ingrained into you as never to give up, because you recite the soldier's creed, which has the warrior ethos. I will always place the mission first. I know people are going to get mad at me. I will always place the mission first. I will never accept defeat. I will never quit. I will never lose a fallen comrade. And that just gets ingrained to you to never give up. That, and they don't threaten you in a way, but they do. Because if you give up, you'll be there longer, sitting around doing absolutely nothing, because during the time I went to basic training, you did not have a cell phone. You saw it twice. The first phone call you make and the last phone call you make.
So unlike the Navy SEALs, there's no bell you ring and just can go in a nice warm lodge with nice warm food and then you're let go. There's none of that. You're going to have to stick around, basically.
Yes.
Now, you mentioned a few minutes ago, they ingrain certain things into you, like the creed, so that way, to some unconscious psychological level, it is not your go-to emotional or logical response to just give up.
Absolutely.
Because of the conditioning. Now, that's obviously a very minor version, but a very real world military version of conditioning. And there's a lot of forms of conditioning, whether it's TV advertising or the propaganda in the news, and that actually literally just popped up in my head as I was saying that out loud just now. I didn't even think about that before. Can you confirm or deny that there is very clear propaganda in the news when a lot of people think that's just conspiracy theory?
I will say I don't know which parts of it are real and which parts of it are made up. I believe, don't believe everything that you read in the news. Don't believe everything that you see. Research it yourself.
Do your due diligence. That one thing I've noticed not a lot of YouTube watchers like to do.
Yes.
Hypnosis isn't real. You clearly haven't read Dave Elman's Hypnotherapy. Okay, got it. You clearly haven't read the Stanford Medicine 2016 study proving the existence and efficacy of hypnosis. Got it. So in that sense, you clearly haven't done your own due diligence beyond what the news teleprompter reader on the news station is, repeating. So with that in mind, and obviously moving forward to this, what you're allowed to say. I'm not here to pressure you or pry anything out of you that you legally can't put out. But that's also a really big, does it ever stress you out? I'm thinking from like my perspective, if I was in your position, be like, does it ever stress you out that you're just like, I hope I don't say the wrong thing at the wrong time and accidentally just screw myself?
Absolutely. And another example of that is when we go to field training missions where we're gone, it could be 2 weeks, it could be 3 days, it could be 12 months, 15 months, 1 month. We're not allowed to tell our families when we're leaving, the exact date. So what a lot of people do is they'll say, expect me to be gone either days before, so that way their family can prepare themselves and they don't know when their soldier is leaving. Because we see a lot of times in the buildings that you walk around, loose lips sink ships.
That's interesting. I like that phrase.
And
now, what does that mean exactly?
That means that when you talk about something or post something, you're not putting what we call OPSEC in mind, which is security. And that means somebody else that you told could post something of when you're leaving, what airline you're flying, and essentially put you and your fellow soldiers at risk.
And for the sake of, I don't even know how I want to phrase this. I think just for the sake of my own curiosity, because I feel like if I think of certain things like this on the spot, there has to be one or a few other people that think the same thing. But how would that put people at risk if I would assume that's going to be, for example, a very specific flight that they would only allow specific people on?
Not necessarily. Some of our flights are commercialized. So we do go to an actual commercial airplane. We do fly in a commercial airport with a commercial airplane. Sometimes it is contracted, but not always.
With that in mind, these aren't things I was thinking I was going to ask, but like now I'm like getting more and more intrigued the more we're talking about it. Is this covert to a sense, and like you're not going to dress up in your military uniform, you're going to go as a civilian, so it's not known that that's why you're getting on the airplane?
Exactly. Even though a lot of our bags are camouflaged to represent the uniform that we wear, it's still not as openly covert that, yes, we are flying.
That begs the question, what are like some basic telltale signs of a military person who might be trying to be covert?
I would definitely say a baseball cap, believe it or not. Males with baseball caps, to be perfectly honest with you. Or what we're supposed to be wearing is business casual. Exactly, John, just like that. You will see quite a few males with baseball caps. Another big dead giveaway is our bags because they are so big, they can fit so much inside of them. And in basic training, you're actually taught how to stuff your bag so you can fit as much into it as possible.
Now, is this a special bag? Because you said so. I guess I should interject myself. Two-part question. One, are they all camouflage, or are some of them just regular bags but just very big?
It depends on what that soldier decides to bring. It most of the time they are camouflage because they are much bigger than some of the commercial airline stuff.
And does that mean others are just like regular backpacks to some degree?
Regular backpacks, some can be small carry-ons. It all depends and varies.
Now I'm getting a little bit interested, and it seems I would know to kind of like the untrained ear. The next question seems just pointlessly nuanced, but in my mind, I'm also hyper aware that nuances can dictate a huge factor in everyday life. So, for example, like when I was asking you what are nuances of what to look for, one of the things I was thinking was posture when someone's walking, or how
Oh,
they verbally,
absolutely.
or
Absolutely.
how they verbally interact even.
Absolutely. That is huge. So the big thing that you can tell is how they walk and when they walk in step with their person they're walking next to. That's how it's going to be because in basic training, that's how you're taught walking in step together side by side. So when somebody takes a step, that other person's going to take a step at the exact same time. And most of the time, they don't even realize it's happening
Because of the conditioning.
because of the conditioning. They just don't realize it.
What forms of conditioning beyond stepping, beyond, being told, tell your family expect days before this date, beyond
Or
what we've talked
after the
about,
state, yes.
what are forms of psychological conditioning that, because it's known, I find it interesting that it's known that most people know to some degree the military conditions you, but I also, under the personal belief, and correct me if I'm wrong, there's plenty that you're conditioned that we have no inkling of a clue of, that isn't regularly talked
Absolutely.
about.
That is very, very true. Yes.
What any insight can you give on that?
So the reason that the drill sergeants yell at you, stress you out so much, I don't know if this is no knowledge or not, is so that way when you're under stress or under pressure, you will not forget that training you received. You will just be able to do it right away, execute perfectly every time
Hmm.
because of that stress that you feel and the stress that you're under.
I think I learned that in a YouTube video about the Navy SEALs.
It is very true.
So I'm guessing that just makes it so that way, no matter if people are yelling or bombs are going off or any craziness is going, you're able
Or
to
there's
tap into the,
gunfire. Yes.
you're just like,
And it
okay,
also depends on the type as well, because you have indirect fire, which is mortar rounds going off, as an example. So there's a specific drill that you do for that. That's just laying on the ground fast as you can, mortar round goes off, and then you're running, booking it to cover, booking it to a bunker, whatever is safe that will protect you. And
so
then you have indirect fire or direct fire, which is like small arms, gunfire. And then mostly you're just moving, shooting, and communicating with everybody else at that same time. So everybody's yelling over each other to make sure that the form is perfect.
what forms of conditioning exactly or broadly are really going on to some degree? Because I remember when I was trained in Vegas in 2011, I met a young gentleman, very proper posture, very, now that I think about it in retrospect, intentional focus on what was going on with someone from our training group who was hypnotizing someone in the street, and there was a big circle of guys. And my only thought in the moment was, I want to talk with this guy because he looks kind of like a big deal just for some reason to me. He's got the posture, he's got the focus, he was dressed pretty well. I mean, for Vegas, that is. And
Of course.
and the thing was, I didn't even know he was military. I didn't have that inkling of knowledge of what to look for, read people or anything at that time. And I want to see if I can just hypnotize a man, because the one thing I did understand was men have ego. Men have ego, women have emotions. And even though a lot of people don't like that, it's very true. And when I go to high schools, but especially colleges and corporate parties, men are egotistical and thinking, you can't get me, you can't hypnotize me. And women are just scared usually about the idea of getting hypnotized because I might reveal something or make them look silly or whatever. But I remember all this just to say, I remember looking at him, and that was my first real world experience of unintentionally using conversational steering, one, to say, hey, do you think that's interesting? Do you like that? And then he's like, yeah, this is interesting. What's going on? I'm like, oh, I think they're learning hypnosis. I was like, he's like, oh, that's interesting. I'm like, yeah, would you like to try it? And I was like steering it that way, thinking I was really sly as a teenager. And then he looked at me and goes, oh, no, I can't. I'm like, you can't be hypnotized? Or he goes, no, I'm not allowed to. I'm like, why? He goes, I work for and he just looks at me and goes, I work for the government. And I was like, oh? And he goes, they literally test us to see if we've been hypnotized for comedic purposes or whatever. Because if we are, we could be let go, because that could cause a conflict with whatever job position we have with the government. And I don't even remember if he told me what position he had, but he did let me know he worked for the government. And in his position, he's literally never allowed to go to a comedy hypnosis show and get hypnotized, or even go to, I don't even think he's allowed to go to hypnotherapist unless he got it approved by one of his higher ups.
That is true, yes. And the TRICARE, which is our insurance company, does not cover hypnotherapy.
Is that intentional?
That is intentional, yes. The TRICARE has to vet out all the systems, all the training, all the processes to make sure, yes, this is safe, this can work, it's been proven to work. Now we have to find people who are certified and implement this and make sure that they have all this training, all this knowledge before they're actually accepted.
And that's also, I was just talking with our lawyer about this a few months ago. That's also ironically a slippery slope, because in this day and age in 2023, it seems like every other program out there, even not good quality ones, for $1, $2, maybe $300, are just throwing out certifications if you just go to a weekend seminar. So how, if because now I'm interested in that, is like, how do you even vet the right kind of person to even go to, and like every other person can get certified, whether or not it was actually a good quality certification training?
That I don't actually know, but I would imagine it's a very strict hiring process and a very strict appeal process for something like that. And it has to go way high up, maybe possibly even to the Pentagon, because again, it's TRICARE being used for it to even be approved. I would imagine. I don't know the specifics.
Just I never really thought about it. So I hypnotized my very first ever roommate when I went to college because he said, "What are you gonna do to pay the bills? What do you? I don't know your job." And I was like, "Oh, I'm a hypnotist." He's like, "What?" And the thing was, at the time, he was at that time. Now he had just gotten out. He was officially non-active. I think he was Air Force. And I was like, "Well, have you ever been hypnotized?" And he said, "No." And I don't know what his training was like. I never fully asked, like I'm speaking with you, but I hypnotized him. And some people, this is a little bit of a nuance where some people are gonna be like, "What?" But I hypnotized him just to relax him and de-stress him. And I don't even remember what he was telling me that he wanted me to pay in my part of rent. But I remember hypnotizing him to de-stress him, decompress him, make him feel a little bit better mentally, emotionally, physically. And then I said something, a very nuanced phrase near the end that basically insinuated, when I ask you what the rent is, in your mind you will think, feel, and believe that it is blank. And I think I made it like $50 cheaper or something. And then I woke him up and I was like, "How do you feel?" And he was, I'm sorry, I stopped, my stomach started growling. I didn't want that getting in the recording. um but I hypnotized him. I woke him up and I said, "How do you feel?" And he just did one of those,
What the heck happened?
like, wow. And then within moments I go, "Yeah." And you said, and I can't remember if I said you said the rent was, or if I said, "Hey," and you said the rent was, and then the number I said. And then he was like, "Yeah." And I said, "Cool. That's how I'm gonna pay the rent." And I shook his hand. And so that was, some people would consider that manipulation. Some people would consider that hypnotic negotiation. And there's a lot of things you could consider it. But at that time, it was my way of proving what I could do, while simultaneously also trying to financially benefit myself, because this was like right before I told myself I'm going to leave college and do this full time, because I was so emotionally and mentally into hypnosis and what it could do, that the fact that I could lower my rent by giving a basic demo to my friend from the Air Force, and then it worked. And full disclosure, the main reason I'm willing to say this is because I would end up years later coming out and telling him, like, "By the way, remember that demo I did when I first met you? And you're like, 'How are you going to pay rent?' And he goes, 'Yeah.' And I explained all this to him, and he's like, 'You motherfucker.'" I was like, "So please don't be mad at me. If you really want, we can make up a payment plan, and I can pay you like for the amount of time I was there back, and for the amount I took off." And he's like, "No," he's like, that's cool. I didn't even know you did that. I'm impressed you could even do that." I was like, "Yeah, it's a thing." But do you think, as a silly example as that is, that is one of many, many array of reasons why they would vet hypnotherapists, let alone they do not want you to go see a hypnotist or anyone that could do hypnosis or NLP?
Absolutely. Absolutely. That is one huge reason. And they've even started canceling certain tests to vet certain mental issues because of the way the questions are worded and the phrasing that's used to make it seem like, okay, it's the same question, but it's asked in a different way, that it's no longer the same question. And then some people overthink that. And the next thing you know, they haven't even finished the test.
Can you give an example of that?
An example would be when they do a certain test for a specific type of mental issue, say anxiety or depression, they will ask these list of questions. It'll be like 100, 200 questions within like an hour, 30-minute, hour time frame. It's not a whole lot of time that you're given to really read and think about these questions to answer as honestly as possible. So the next thing you know, you're just putting answers down as fast as you can, because that anxiety of the military, the phrase that we always use, you're going to be late. That will give any service member anxiety. If it doesn't, then that means they're okay with it. And then they're going to get food before they go to the thing that they think that they're late for. So then they rush through it, not really reading it, not really thinking about it, just to get through it so that way they make it on time. Because that is a huge thing that we're conditioned on, is time. 10 minutes early is 5 minutes late.
Interesting. So, motto for not giving up, time. What other general categories are they conditioning you on?
The other conditioning is, like I mentioned, the warrior tasks and drills. So that way you're stressed out, you're thinking, you're not thinking, but you're doing. Another thing is just do it. Another huge thing that they do, some people have issues with running, so they just run, run, run. So they'll do it on a dirt road that you're running on, and the track's going to be a little bit longer just to make sure that you can meet the time that you can, or at least that's how it was with my training. And then you're just running. They're yelling at you. And then if you're walking, they're yelling at you, just to give you that motivation, even if it's fake, even if it's in yourself, that false motivation to just keep pushing, keep driving on.
The hilarious turnout for my SATs were saying that I was like a B minus or like a B average student, but the majority of all my report cards told me I was C minus average.
Mm.
And it's funny when I see people now who are younger and they have been conditioned by society to believe I have to go to school, I have to get great grades, I have to be on the honor roll, I have to get into a great college, I have to get a great 9 to 5, I have to have this career path, and I have to be okay, and I have to be in the set path. And then they look at me and go, well, it's easy for you, or you're lucky because you get to do what you love. I'm just like, well, the only difference is I just realized at a sooner age that you don't have to go with the system and what you're conditioned to believe, think, and feel about society and being an adult and living life in America. You don't have to go along with the system to have a house or to be able to pay your bills or be able to have food on the table. And that is a very simplistic thing, but I found it very interesting that the younger generations coming in now to like high school or even college, but especially high school students, it's much different than it was 10 years ago. When I feel like that was the start of what we have now with all these influencers and entrepreneurs like me. And in my own friend group, I was the very first one to have that mentality. Like back in 2010, 2011, 2012, it wasn't that popular. By 2015, 2020, the influencer space and the self-help space and the online sales space and that entrepreneurial mentality started blowing up. But I believe it's partly because people like me started documenting or just posting, hey, here's what we're doing. Here's proof, whether it's me and my channel. And this is a huge tip to any entertainer out there who's trying to go pro, is literally just documenting your journey like a vlog or posting testimonials of what you're doing, proving that you are good at what you do, that people like what you do, and then also posting the show that the testimonial represents. Because that's all social media conditioning to show that this lifestyle still works in America, and that a lot of people don't like I say this, but that just because you're told systematic education is necessary doesn't mean it is.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Now, what kind of people are usually coming to the military? You said broken home families, but like
not a lot of opportunities, or they haven't had that chance for a good college or decent college, can't get out of the house and they want to, or they just want to explore the world. So they join the military, and they start becoming an independent adult in what they need to do. They start learning how to be by themselves, whether it's cooking, cleaning, because some people don't even know how to do that before they join the military. And sometimes you have to baby them and teach them how to do these things.
I was just thinking, in comparison to what I just said, society is conditioning us in various forms to be a part of the system, to feed the engine of society. And even though I didn't go and get a degree, I still kind of feed society in my own way as an entrepreneur. And me doing what I do has also, I've realized, directly and indirectly influence other people, some people, to literally either do the same thing, want to quit school, or maybe they've already got their degree, but now they want to go their own entrepreneurial path. Is the military in any way, shape, or form pushing or covertly conditioning a certain mindset or pushing a certain ideology that needs to be lived out or taken action on or whatnot?
Absolutely. One of the big things that they stress on is education. Is you will not get promoted or you will have a hard time being promoted unless, sorry, I thought my dog was seeing a ghost or something. And education, you will not be promoted or you will have a harder time promoting because you don't have a degree or because you're not as competitive. And so they push for education. First it was college education, but now they brought in more credentialing education. So 9 months before they get out of the military, they can actually be certified for a trade job of their choosing. And even while they're in the military, they can choose to do both the education or the trade jobs, or they could do one or the other. It really depends on how much budget funding they have for that education. And on top of that as well, there's also military schools and classes that they can do at the same time if they can even get into those, because some of those are hard to get into. So the education is definitely stressed. That is the mindset. Or even volunteering. Volunteering isn't as stressed, but the education and the schooling is definitely something that's stressed. Is what are you doing that's not part of your job that makes you well-rounded?
Is there any nonchalant or indirect push or coercing to stay in the military? Or are you encouraged to do what you're meant to do during your time and then potentially try to return to civilian life and live it out there? Or do they want you to stay?
It depends on who you're talking to. If you are talking to a career counselor, they definitely want you to stay. If you choose to talk to a recruiter, I don't understand why you would want to after being in the military, but you can. They would also ask you to stay as well, because as we see these recruiting numbers fall, how they're getting people is through the retention numbers to make it up, to keep people in the military. At the same time, you might have that leader that says, you know what, you have all this education because of your military experience. You've served your contract. If you wish to get out of the military and no longer serve, that is up to you. And sometimes what we're struggling with now as the military is certain jobs have all these amazing certifications or education that they have just based on that job. So then after the military, these people get out, they're making $125,000, $150,000 a year because of this military experience, and so people don't want to stay in because of that. Or you have other people where it's like they're married or divorced, they have 5 kids that they can't afford to take care of. Childcare is expensive, and so they continue to stay. So it really depends on the circumstance of each individual and how they feel and how they progress or how they are progressing.
I feel like you might be a unique person because not a lot of people I know want to stay in the position you're in and actually make military their life. What was there conditioning to that, or do you just felt like even before you entered that this was what you were meant to do?
So, 2 parts to that. The first part was I want to stay. I was very young. I want to stay. I want to do my 20 years. I want to retire. Now that I'm 10 years in, I'm still on that point of staying or leaving. I do want to stay, but it's like my body is so broken because of the certain trainings that we do. And I want that free healthcare when I get out in 10 more years, and that's all it takes. 10 more years. I have my amazing retirement. If there's any disability that goes along with that, I'll get paid for that as well. I'll be taken care of because there's a lot of veteran or government websites that are hiring, and even if I don't decide to get a job, I could decide to take up a hobby and just enjoy myself and relax after my 20 years.
Would you consider that looming carrot in the distance, or that looming donut in the distance of free healthcare, would that be in your mind a perk and a bonus, or is that more of a bribe?
Both. And there's also a disadvantage to that as well.
What's that?
As you've probably seen in the movie, Thank You for Your Service, it was like a low budget movie. There's a lot of waiting around, and the military conditions you that for that as well, because even when you enter, you're waiting in lines, you're quiet, there's not really much going on. So you're conditioned to just sit and wait. Hurry up, get to your destination, sit and wait. That's why they call it hurry up and wait.
Is that genuinely where that comes from?
That is genuinely where that comes from. Genuine. Hurry up and wait. Because then once you get there, you're just going to be waiting. And those people who with the phrase you're going to be late, if they don't feel that anxiety, that means they're going to be the ones getting breakfast and being at the end of the line, and the line's not moving because they already know the line's not going to move. The only time that becomes an issue is for appointments, obviously, because it is heavily stressed. Do not miss your appointment. That is free money that is not being used because you didn't show up for your appointment, and you can get into some serious trouble for that.
Are there signs, kind of like we talked about what to look for in airports of people going on deployment? Are there signs that other military branches give off, if that makes sense?
In some cases, yes. Especially if you're around a military base, like you already know. You can already tell who's retired. You can tell who's a civilian. And I'm going to use this word. It's a very derogative term, a dependapotopus. And what that is a dependent who has all these kids, and you're basically taking care of the dependent and the kids. And that dependent does absolutely nothing. But going back to the question, you can usually tell It's a little bit more difficult, but you can also tell by the walk and how fast people walk, especially in certain states where there's a lazy type of walking or you're not really in a rush to go anywhere. Then it's easier to tell because you can tell who's fast walking, who's trying to bypass the crowd, and who isn't. But in a place like New York where you're always in a rush, then it would definitely be harder to tell.
I was gonna say by those standards, I'm in the military already. When I'm at the airport, I'm like, go, 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 go. Gotta get there at 4 a.m. Why? Because we need to be there early.
Yes, yes. And even with our flight travels, it's usually about hurry up, get there at 1 in the morning, wait 4 hours, then you ride the bus, and then you leave.
So being in your branch of the military, in the same way that you have signs that you can read people who are in the military, in terms of applicable real life advice, are there signs of, for example, how to read people or situations from a distance to know if you should avoid people or groups of people or potential bad situations?
I would say just read the body language, try to listen to any of the how the words are spoken as well, if there's any aggressiveness to it. It could be just that person's culture, to be honest with you, because it is a very America is very diverse. And it could just be how they grew up, where they grew up, but it also depends on, the situation of it. Is it broad daylight? Is it at night? Is it in an open park? Is it in a back alley? Things like that.
And have you ever been in just a regular venue like a bar or something during just the day or maybe early evening where you could just kind of spot a no good character from a mile away or a potential bad situation that you could tell was building up for a little bit?
Sometimes. I usually don't go to bars in the middle of the day or early in the evening. That's mostly at night, but that if I have the day off when I was younger and I felt like it, then I would. But it was a rare occurrence.
So to broaden it, because that was just meant as a very simplistic example, is there a real life example that you can share of when you've been anywhere with anyone, you've either seen something build up or you could just tell someone was someone that you should probably avoid for some reason?
Absolutely. We were in a parking lot of this bar. I was with my friends. We were about to leave, and a couple cars away, it looked like a drug deal was going down.
How
This is not
other
on the
than like
military post.
money in this person's hand and that person gives me a bag, what I guess I never grew up in the hood enough to understand what would how do you know the starting of a drug deal or what that looks like without seeing that specific action happen, or if it is one even?
Definitely the back of the car was open. There were two people talking. It sounded like there might have been some shouting going on, just like minor shouting at each other. And my friend looked over there and he's like, "Yeah, that looks like that there's a drug deal going on." So we quickly got into our car, and unfortunately, I was driving. Parking lot was very confusing. So we had to pass by them again to get out. And it was a big city. We were in the city of St. Louis at the time. And it was late at night. So it just wasn't a good situation that we wanted to be a part of.
How much of, whether it's MK Ultra or another government program, how much of direct or indirect hypnosis are you aware of in the military or in the general government?
I wouldn't necessarily say hypnosis. I'm not aware that it is happening or going on, and I have safety features in my brain to know when things are happening. It sounds like alarm bells going off in my head when something like that does happen. I wouldn't say it's not very often, not at all, not in my experience. Recent years.
So not in your position or current branch of the military, but you said something interesting there. You said you have alarm bells, and then you said it actually sounds like bells or alarm bells in your head.
Yes.
Was that a conditioning you gave yourself that someone gave you, or what?
That was something that somebody had given me.
So even though it wasn't covert or, secret or dark or anything, there what was there was that just done for you or everyone in your kind of status and position? Why was that done? Slash how?
That I cannot discuss.
So my educated guess, in hopes that you can probably just confirm or deny, is you can't discuss how it was done, but it was done so that way you could at least somewhat in the moment recognize something that you should probably either avoid, stay away from, or what that wasn't true and that you didn't have to worry about.
That is correct.
And does it actually sound like legitimate, like bells or alarms or alarm bells going off in your head when you notice something?
Yes, and my eyes immediately shoot up in alert.
So this was something that was conditioned over time, correct?
Over time, yes.
Now, did it start initially when you joined, or did that come later?
That came later.
I'm guessing based on what position you're promoted to or graduated to, or however you want to say it.
Not necessarily, no. No.
So was it given to other people as well, or just you for what you were learning slash being promoted to?
Can we move on to next question?
So we've now begun creeping into the territory of something that highly interests me all the time, which is what is the military doing or saying that is covert and or guiding whether or not the soldiers or the staff sergeants or the sergeants or the higher ups may or may not know themselves is actually being said or done for a certain other reason that people may not be consciously aware of. So I'm going to ask this as broad as possible and then kind of microscope it down, which is, are there things that you in your position are telling other people that realistically have a different meaning down the line? And or if you're aware of it, do you think there are things that you're getting from your higher ups that have the same purpose behind why they're said?
Absolutely. So how that works is you have the higher ups. We'll go with this higher ups way up here. They're the ones that decide everything. They're the ones that are funding these missions. And then you got these higher ups here, multiples of them, just a couple that are also feeding that information down, taking that information, making it relevant to them, because the higher ups up here makes it for all the units that are here. And then these units tailor it down to these levels right here where there's more of them all over. And then they eventually drop down to that. I'm trying to get the camera here. Drop down to that lowest level where it encompasses everybody who's there at that moment. So everybody in a perfect world would understand what it is they're doing, what their mission mindset is, how they prepare for it, and as well as having any constraints or any restrictions and preparing for things that could go wrong as well. And they're just automatically thinking that, or a lot of the staff sergeants, sergeant first classes, they're thinking about those type of things and they're relaying it to the junior leaders who are relaying it to their young soldiers.
And how do you think the different levels of relaying is getting altered per level for a specific reason?
It could be that it could depend on the leader, because the leader might say, okay, I'm going to give this person this specific mission. I'm going to tell them what the mission is. And because they trust that individual so much that they're just going to get it done. And then that individual is going to pass it back up to that sergeant or that staff sergeant, saying like what they did, what happened, and if there's anything else that they could prepare for. And that staff sergeant's going to mentor them as well as when they do it. So that way they know. So when they go up to the next level, they'll be better prepared for something like that. And then the sergeant first class is overseeing all these staff sergeants that he or she has to make sure that the mission's being executed with that particular team
And I
or
would
that squad.
and I would assume that these people that the staff sergeants are looking over are actually also indirectly using it as a test to establish who is good at what for what reason, and that's actually what's indirectly establishing the trust and rapport with them and that person to have the trust to make that relay of information that could also then lead into some bigger opportunities and information later on down the line for them.
Absolutely. That is one reason for it. Another reason is to see where their blind spots are and helping them buffer those up so they can prepare better in the future.
So while not super like dark and secret, it is a form of covert communication because they're not always, I'd especially assume when they first join the military, they're not always aware that it is not in fact black and white why they're being told what they're being told to do.
Right. Well, it is black and white in some cases. Like you have the direct mission, the direct task, but then you have the implied part of it as well. And that implied part is the part where a lot of people miss because it's not the direct task, but it's implied, but you still have to do it. So even though it's not said, it still needs to be accomplished.
So can you give us a very basic example of that just for general understanding?
Very basic example. Let me see. I'm trying to think of one because there's quite a few. I would say if I had to pick, going to a range, something as simple as that, firing your weapon. So you know that you're leaving this date and time. This is how you're going to leave. This is the time that you're picking up your weapons, and then they're taking ammo in a different vehicle because it has to be done that way. So you know all of that. So the implied task is, hey, make sure you have your helmet, make sure you have your body armor, make sure you have earplugs so you don't go deaf, make sure you have the big old birth control goggles, as we like to call them, BCGs, or B birth control. Yeah, BCGs. Again, a term that people aren't familiar with, birth control goggles, because they do make you look ugly unless you have the shades. They do improve it with the shades, but if you have the clear ones, you're just gonna look ugly no matter what, and that's okay. So the birth control goggles to make sure you're not getting anything in your eye. If a bullet happens to come back, it'll hit the goggles, bounce off. You might have a crack in the goggles because of the military protection increments that they use. And then anything else that you might need, definitely gloves. Gloves, huge part. So these are all the implied tasks that you're supposed to have. Now, some other extras that aren't said, that aren't implied is, oh, we might be here out all day. Let me grab some water. Let me grab some snacks.
How much, if any, covert or direct government control, beyond what we all obviously know the government's already doing for whatever reason they're doing it, is there actual covert government control going on? Whether that's, for example, like earlier I mentioned propaganda in the news, and not a lot of people can, deny that. Obviously, you're in a certain position where you can obviously deny whatever you need to deny, but I'm pretty sure that, it's safe to say that there's a very clear agenda to some degree when it comes to the news. But is there any type of covert control? For example, it's been said a lot that TikTok has become a way for foreign governments to understand, either one, understand what we're into, what we like, and everything we're doing, and that the app watches this, watches that, blah blah blah, but also to help feed us garbage while they're feeding their own citizens legitimate educational material. That's just an example with a specific app. Whether it's technology or the news or how things are run in cities, is there a type of direct or covert government control we're not aware of?
I cannot confirm nor deny that.
Should we be afraid?
I cannot confirm or deny that.
Are you afraid?
I will not confirm nor deny that.
Are you allowed to leave?
What do you mean?
Like
Leave?
the position you're in now with the military, would you be allowed to up and leave right now or no?
Not right now at this moment because of a contract that I signed.
Okay, so there's not like some really big thing going on that they need you for. You're just part of the contract right now.
Yes.
This would be something I know that you wouldn't be able to specify, so I'll ask it broadly. Are there things that you know in terms of covert approaches, whether it's physical or verbal, that have helped you in the military that are just as applicable for your civilian life? Just a yes or no.
Yes.
And are these things regularly taught to the average person, whether it's through schooling or the education system, or is that hyper specific because of you being in the position you're in?
It would be hyper specific to reach a certain audience.
But are they still realistically usable in your everyday life or just for your position?
Still usable.
Would they benefit the everyday person, or would it be kind of pointless?
There's benefits, yes. They would be beneficial.
And kind of like covert hypnosis and even regular hypnosis, why people are so obsessed with scripts, but as hypnotists and in the field and in the profession, we know that realistically a lot of people already know these things, because again, it's just words, it's just English, is just sentence structure. But we obviously understand the ins and outs of forming and constructing said sentence structure. Do we know a lot of things that that may be covert or direct that'd be also useful to civilian life? Do we, some of us, without knowing it, do we already secretly maybe know these things? We're just not aware of how to put them to use like you do?
Yes.
And is this conversational or tactical or both?
Both.
Interesting. Well,
The conversational, it depends on who you talk to and how you talk to them.
are any of the things you're currently thinking about and saying yes or no to, will these ever be things you're allowed to disclose when you're out?
Yes.
When are you going to be out?
um so technically my ETS, as we call it, my permanent leave from the military would be next year September. However, this is only my 10-year contract, and fingers crossed, I'm hoping for another 10.
So you actually obviously, and I only say obviously because of how you just phrased that, genuinely enjoy what you're doing where you're at.
I do, yes.
So that's your, do you think that what you're doing now, and this is a genuine question, I'm not trying to make you guess your life choices or make you feel bad for anything, do you genuinely feel like this is your purpose?
I used to, until certain circumstances happened where I'm now switching jobs in the military, still staying, but just switching to a different job.
What would be the worries, if any, behind a hypnotist coming to entertain the military? Because we were talking about, you know, covert manipulation, conditioning, this and that, therapy, and why, technically speaking, ironically, you're not usually allowed to go to that kind of entertainment kind of thing. So would and this isn't me trying to do a verbal interview covert job application, but would it, one, be realistic if I tried to do a show at your base? And two, even if it was realistic, what would be the kind of safety precautions behind that?
So one, I would definitely say not very realistic at all because of all the processes and everything you have to be vetted through. And there are a lot of roadblocks, huge roadblocks. When you get through one, then you're just going to meet another, and then you're going to meet another. And it's going to feel near impossible, but it's not, possibly, unless they just tell you no. Secondly, a lot of the information that soldiers have that they don't even realize is unclassified but controlled information
What's an
that
example
they
of
could
that?
accidentally give away. So for an example, you have a mechanic of a tank. You have a tank mechanic. And all of a sudden, this is a true story that you can find on the internet. This tank mechanic starts taking pictures of this tank and then either uses it as espionage to give our competitors, or they just post it somewhere and then suddenly it's public information, and then suddenly this tank now has defenses that are no longer able to defend it because of attacks that could be had against it, knowing what its weakness might be.
If you were to reveal something they're not supposed to reveal, what would happen to you?
I would, excuse me, I would lose my job, first and foremost, lose my security clearance, possibly get kicked out of the army, maybe, depends on the severity, sent to prison in Leavenworth. I want to say it's Missouri, Leavenworth, Missouri, the military prison.
Have you ever been to jail or prison?
I have not, no. I prefer to keep it that way.
You said, not today, Satan.
Not today.
Have you ever gotten close to accidentally doing something?
Yes.
Was that more toward the beginning when you were first learning things, or was it when you were more seasoned and you were having an off day, you didn't think about it?
More seasoned, definitely having an off day.
And how bad was it?
It was pretty bad.
So how did you make it to where we are here today with each other?
Let me see. Eventually I got away from the situation, which made it a lot better, and I still continued my service.
Did you need to be involved with it to begin with?
Unfortunately, yes and no.
Was it a
Because
personal?
yeah, you're good.
I was just
Personal.
okay. Because my what pops in my head is you give something away, they're gonna send you to prison, so you turn into Edward Snowden and you just move to Russia.
Well, might be worse.
That tastes so good. Hydration.
I will say this though. I am learning Russian Because the military does pay people, if you know a certain language, extra money, or if you're in a special operations unit like airborne, air assault, ranger, special forces. The military does offer you Navy SEALs, anything like that. The military does offer extra money for those benefits.
I want to step back for a moment and touch base back on. I'm not sure if I misunderstood this or not, but saying that you had an off day, you almost revealed something, you were in a situation for a personal reason, and then me joking like, oh, you could turn into female Edward Snowden and go to Russia. And then you said, but worse. I'm not sure if you meant what the situation itself would be worse, or what your punishment would that or for that would have been worse, or both.
Oh, no, just going to that particular country.
Okay, so Russia would be worse.
Yes.
Have you been trained to communicate verbally in some way that isn't completely direct in conversation with the person you're communicating with for any reason? AKA kind of like as a doing covert hypnosis, for example, me talking with a roommate and implying that rent will be lowered and then getting actual lowered rent, or in conversation utilizing a sentence structure to covertly upsell and get a client to give me a higher paying contract.
That in a way, yes, but not overly so, if that makes sense. For example, I talk to people about possibly their feelings of frustration or their uncertain future because they might have got in trouble and they don't know what their future is looking like. So they tell me what it is that had happened, how they're getting punished for it, and I say, all right, so I know this is how this process works. It's ultimately up to this person or this person, and it's recommended from these people of what's going to happen and how that punishment is going to go forward. And then I'll say it could be anywhere from this to this, so that way they're better prepared of what to expect in that. And sometimes I even talk to some of the junior enlisted, we're not allowed to call them lower anymore, junior enlisted, about this mission that we're doing. And it's like, oh, I'm doing this because this person told me. And I'm like, okay. So then I sit down with them and I'm like, we're doing this training for this specific purpose. And it's like a light bulb goes off in their head and they're like, oh, that makes sense. So then they start thinking about those implied tasks that we talked about earlier.
That reminds me of reading Never Split the Difference by Chris Voss, and especially when you're in a one-on-one, not even necessarily interrogation situation, but a therapeutic or an educational one or an understanding one, I would assume, like you were just speaking of. I loved reading every chapter that he wrote in his book, because it would start out with an example of what he was about to teach in every chapter, and then and what was interesting was every chapter technique he was giving, the technique itself, and this is something that seemed to blow people's minds away, especially HypnoKick University, when they actually learn how to hypnotize people. And they go, what's the script? Where are the words? Where's the magic? And our last student go, for the whole first day of training, he said, where's the magic? What's the magic? And I'm like, this is the magic. He's like, it can't be. And he literally kept saying, it can't be that simple. And some people, I think, have this grandiose idea sometimes of what us as hypnotists are doing, what you as the military are doing. But even Chris Voss, who, by the way, this is one of my favorite nuances, one of my favorite implied things in the book, he actually indirectly speaks of and affirms hypnosis as an FBI negotiator and talks about different tactics. But every time it comes to actually having to recite a script, the script is almost like between like that long and like that long out of a whole chapter. And then he breaks it down into the nuances, and you realize, oh, it is this powerful, even though it's only this because of these reasons. I want to switch gears to something that I know when HypnoKick first came out with some covert training, it reminded me a lot of regular street or stage hypnosis, but just basic hypnosis training, because whenever it comes to hypnosis, and I literally just saw a comment on this on someone else's YouTube yesterday, when people want to learn hypnosis, they're obsessed with scripts because they are under the impression every script is a magical key to an end result, without realizing most of it is pretty simplistic in the sense that they're all just regular words. It's just, how are you structuring the sentence, and what is your authority and tonality when using said words in said sentence that get the result? Because at the end of the day, it's like, I have taught teenagers how to hypnotize each other, or adults, within 30 to 40 to 60 minutes. And they're like, wow, this works. I'm like, well, it's just the normal language you already speak, but in a certain setting, in a certain tone, for a certain purpose. And as Chris Jones would say, I say the right words in the right order. And when it comes to covert hypnosis, it's basically the same thing. It's saying the right words in the right order in the right environment for a determinable outcome. How much of that is going on in the military?
I would say it depends on the communication between the leaders, mostly your sergeant first classes, your staff sergeants, and your sergeants. That is mostly where that type of communication would come in. But then there's also the black and white aspect of it, where it's like, okay, here's the script, here's the mission, here's the details, these are the tasks to these units right here. Okay, this is how we're going to communicate. This is the person we're communicating to, and this is how this is going to be executed.
So
What we call that is an op order, which is 5 stages in operational order. So there's 5 parts to it, and that breaks it down from the high level to that low level, or depending on what organizational echelon is releasing it.
is the military using any of this in the propaganda or in the news, or when you guys are interacting with civilians in any way, shape, or form? So that way we either are let in on what you want us to know, or we're being redirected away from something you don't want us to be aware of.
I would say mostly with the recruiting, as you hear about, my recruiter lied to me. That is a lot of what the recruits say. Or the recruiters will be like, oh, here's a bonus for this specific job. Do you want it? And it'll kind of redirect whatever the subject is or talked about, so that way it increases numbers. It's a tactic that they use. Or a lot of what they
I've seen a lot of social media shorts on that. I'm gonna have to link that down in the description, because I can think of one YouTuber off the top of my head that has made so many skits on that. So is
There's
that
probably mandatory fun day.
it's mandatory?
Mandatory fun day. That's one of the Instagram followers that I follow.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
He has some great military videos.
I thought you're like, oh no, they fund us to do this purposely. Wait, do that?
Oh,
Wait, that
but
makes sense though.
they do that too. They call it mandatory fun day. So you're mandated to be here at this specific time for this specific event, but we're still going to make it fun. Or we're going to try to. If you're not having fun, that's your fault. So we call it mandatory fun day, an organizational day.
I know people watching HypnoKick love very plain black and white, direct tips, tricks, scripts, how-tos. What is some either cool government secret or government tactic, or something that you've learned that you'd be allowed to share, that is something that someone could use in their everyday life?
Honestly, for me, it's mostly just the plan or what the goal of something is. Because if you give me the goal, I'm just gonna run with it. I'll have different ideas for things, different choices to use, and I'll bring it back and say, hey, I have these three COAs, which is concept of golly, I forgot what the A means. Um, it's not operations, but these three concepts that I can use, COAs. I forgot what the A means for some reason, but these different operations of what to use, and then I'll draft it on a piece of paper with the 5 W's and the resources and pictures and then all those different things, and I'll present it to my hire and they say yay or nay. So for me, that's usually what I use for my training purposes. Or going back to the range, if I know something like that's happening, then I'm going to prepare for it. And I will be the one person in the bench eating Popeye's chicken and everybody else is jealous.
People who feel unmotivated or feel like they don't have natural motivation or ambition a lot of the time, what is something they can do that maybe you've learned or been forced to do in the military that you think would help with that?
Honestly, I would say talking to a counselor about purpose, because a lot of the young people that we have a high suicide rate of young people, even in the military, in the civilian world, because they feel that they lack that sense of purpose. And so just helping them understand, not, they don't have to necessarily have that perfect purpose, but just having something that gets them along, that gets them going, gets them thinking about what they want to do, thinking about their future, which can be absolutely scary. It can be absolutely scary thinking about that future, but it can also help them in small ways to help them going to have that motivation. And for some people, it's like when they join, it's like, okay, the military isn't for me. So they decide to get out early or they decide to get out on their own terms and they hang up the uniform and leave. And they're okay with that.
I don't know how close we can get to this, but what is probably the most covert or cool everyday conversational or tactical script or trick that you've used in a situation that you think would be beneficial for other people that you're actually allowed to discuss?
So some of the things I do is flyers, posting flyers where people pass by, people see it, it's in their brains every single day. They see it when they come to work and they may think about it or a specific picture even when they don't realize they are thinking about it. Unfortunately, with that, because it's in their brains, they don't necessarily sign up for the specific event, but they know about it. And so that becomes the struggle on my part is yes, they're seeing it. Yes, they want to be involved, but they're not getting involved until either the event's already passed or it's too late to sign up.
So would you say is that proven then that visual representation like flyers everywhere, if there's enough of them, that there is actual legitimate proven psychological conditioning happening with that tactic?
Oh, absolutely. In my case, yes.
And would it be fair to say, from your knowledge, that the more variety there would be of exposing them to said thing outside of just flyers, but including flyers, would help solidify said conditioning?
Absolutely. Because they will hear about it from their leaders and then their leaders will pass it down to them. So that way everybody knows about it. And then there will be reminders that get sent out along with it to say, hey, make sure you sign up if you're interested.
So it goes from not kind of covert, more subtle psychological pushing to direct approach, basically.
Yes.
And it's interesting because it's in a lot. I know some viewers will be like, "Oh, that's so simple. That's so stupid. That's like high school grade stuff." But the fact that you guys are using it and you're actually saying it does work and it's proven.
Yes.
That's interesting because I remember seeing a lot of course, keyboard warriors on the internet. Like, oh, well, that doesn't really work, and it's very Darren Brownie, but he's always just like making this stuff up, and it's all staged. But have you seen it work in real time? Just even like the flyer push in the mind alone.
Yes, because then people will approach me, hey, I want to sign up. How do I sign up? And then I'll explain it to them, and then I'll show them exactly where it's at on the flyer, this nice little neat box of how they sign up.
Has there ever been an instance? Because I think this would, from my perspective, not being in your position, obviously not as knowledgeable, it would solidify the efficacy of that. Has there ever been a position where it's probably likely they were pushed towards something because of a flyer visual, but when they were asked, like, how'd you hear about it or what made you want to join, they're like, I don't really know. I'm just here.
In some cases, in some instances, yes. A lot of, generally speaking, oh, not for me, but generally speaking, a lot of it is I was mandatold. I was mandatory told. It
Right.
doesn't apply to me because I cannot force people to sign up for the events that I post. But for other events, yes. Like we have this amazing program called SHARP, Sexual Harassment Assault Response Prevention, and it's a whole training that discusses what to do, how to combat it, how to prevent it, and we in the military receive that training on a quarterly basis, or we're supposed to receive that training on a quarterly basis. So that is also processed in the mind as well. That see something, say something, act, motivate, intervene.
So there's obviously training on that, a little bit of conditioning. How effective do you think it actually is?
I would say it's not perfect, but it is definitely more effective than anything that we've had in the past.
So one awesome thing I've been working on for the past year is a high ticket selling script without sounding silly, because no one likes being sold to, no one likes being pitched. And I spent a year figuring out how do I figure someone's budget out without saying, hey, just tell me your budget. Because at the end of the day, so many people that come to entertainers or entertainment agencies are just looking for a budget. Like, hey, tell me how much you cost. And some people will do that. However, we try to tailor ourselves to a certain caliber of client. We are no longer, really a $100 or $200 or $300, entertainment agency. We provide a lot of value, a lot of upfront value that not a lot of other entertainers or entertainment agencies do. So therefore, we're usually serving a higher end type of client. And we've realized that a lot of people finding us through the system that we've developed for the past year or two, we're just price shopping. And we weren't sure, how do we get them to communicate? Can they afford us? Are they worth their time? Are they worth our energy or not? And that's not to insult them. That's just to say, hey, this is the level we're at. This is the caliber of client we wish to work with. Are you that person? And we realized that when it came to budget, when it came to money, for example, if we just say, hey, what's your budget? Hey, what's your budget range? And there were so many different ways I tried to phrase that. And I realized for years that people just didn't like it, and that very, very small majority of people will answer the question. The majority will verbally bounce back. and they will hit the tennis ball back in our court and go, how much do you charge? And so for a long time, for a long time, I would be like, oh, I can be flexible, I can be this or I can be that. And then for a very short period of time, I literally said something along the lines of, think of us as the name your price tool from Progressive, except for hypnosis. You name your price, we're going to figure out if we can get within that range. Or you name your range, we're going to figure out if we can put a show in that price. The thing that blew my mind the past year is we don't ask price anymore. And that is the easiest way to get a budget is, and because this is in a system we're currently still developing and legally trying to get covered and everything, I will phrase it as, to give a real world example for sales is, I call this covert because, and this is what I was getting at earlier with the military thing, it's like, what kind of things do you say in certain kind of conversations or situations that is looking for a specific response without specifically asking for said thing? And so with us, I'll say, hey, the market average for this kind of hypnotist in this kind of market is between this range. Does that align with your expectations, or does that align with your budget, or does that align with what you're looking for? Because now we've given an ideology that is true based on our analytics and research and our experience, but we're not specifically asking them, can you afford this price? Or do you have this budget? Or what is your budget? We're saying, hey, this is what you should expect. Is this comfortable for you? And so many more people via text, via email, especially on call, so many more people will talk about that because they don't feel attacked. And we realize that asking about budget, interestingly enough, makes people feel pressured, makes people feel attacked, makes people feel like we're going to be a on-call car salesman for entertainment. And by switching gears and not saying, what's your budget, but here's what you should expect for this kind of hypnotist in this market for this event, does that align with your vision? Does that align with their expectations? Is that comfortably realistic? And
go ahead.
And yeah, and I was going to switch it off to you. It's like, do you have any examples like that vocally? Because I know, again, we say that people love scripts. Do you have any kind of examples from your own end that kind of align with that ideology, if that makes sense?
I've got 3 for you. I'm going to see if I can remember all 3. So the first one is, it depends on who you're talking to. If you're talking to a junior soldier, then they have a completely different mentality. Most likely they're homesick. It's their first time away. It's their first time being an adult, if you will, in some cases. Well, some cases. I say some, because a lot of people who join the military do come from broken homes in a lot of cases, unfortunately, and they have problems that come with that. Then you have some of the junior leaders, and they have their own issues that they're dealing with. They have their own problems. Then you get up to the seniors, and they have their own issues as well. So it depends on who you're talking to, what that issue might be. So for example, a lot of the seniors, theirs is time with family, because they've put so much into their military career that they lack the family. And so when they become a lot of the leaders, they're like, hey, place your family first. When you take off this uniform, that's it. It's over. Take care of your family, because they will be there after you hang this up. And again, depending on your audience, with some of those leaders, a lot of them are struggling with divorce, because the American divorce is 50%. It might have gone up. And then after that, it only increases. So the second divorce is 75% increase. And then it only increases after that. And so the military see a high rate of divorce for various different reasons. And so there's training and communication that you can give to help some of those leaders understand how to communicate with their spouse, how to communicate with themselves or what they're trying to say, so that way it's not taken in any wrong way. So that's another way to do it too, is with the training, communication training. There's various trainings that you can give. 5 love languages is a popular one that we use. Understanding what your love language is, understanding what hurts yourself, what your spouse may do, and the dark side of it, and understanding what your spouse's or your partner's love language is, and communicating that properly with them. So that's another thing that we use with the younger or even some of the more experienced military folks. They have issues with finances. So we have financial classes that can be taught by somebody else that helps them out in some of the things that they do. So
Now,
that way,
you mentioned love language. I think I want to dive into that really quick, just because I know for a fact that that can be very nuanced in the sense of some people need physical attention. Some people just need people to be physically there. Other people need to be told. Other people need to be shown. Other people need to, the
receive. Yeah.
literal 5 senses. Everyone learns and feels something in a different way because that's just how they are. So, for example, a lot of men are visual. A lot of women are kinesthetic.
Yes.
Is that kind of what you mean by that?
That is what I mean by that, is just communicating with each other and learning how to communicate with the for the leaders, communicating with the people, with their subordinates, excuse me, or even learning how to communicate with their higher, so that way they know what their higher wants, what their higher expects, and then they can execute by knowing their soldiers and knowing what's expected of them.
So I'm going to ask a micro example, and then I don't know if you'll be able to help with the macro, but let's start with the micro. What is a micro example of love language in the military in terms of what you were just talking about?
So, micro level, something even as simple as deployment operations. You know that you'll be gone anywhere from this time to this time, and you don't know exactly when you're coming back. So it's a matter of trying to communicate with gifts beforehand, with the physical touches, and learning those struggles, because guess what? As soon as that soldier leaves, the whole house falls apart. Happens every single time. Dishwasher breaks, washer breaks, there's flooding, the dryer doesn't work, something goes wrong. An example of that, when I was gone for training, my wife didn't understand the dishwasher. And when I got back, she started calling it the devil machine. And I could not for the life of me figure out why. And that's because she didn't use the proper detergent for the dishwasher. She used regular soap.
That's a good day. Obviously not.
It's not. But even just communicating that to children as well, children and teens, because they have their own love languages, and keeping those relationships together.
So I don't really know how to transition this into the macro I want it to, but I know what I want to go for. So I guess I'm just going to ask, is the news and the media the only way that the government really attempts to communicate with the American people in the way that it wants to let us know what it wants us to know? Or are there other ways that they try communicating in the sense of, do they have a love language for the general public, or are they very just like, here's the only thing we want them to know, and here's just how we're going to do it every time?
No, there is a love language for it. And
You went silent.
I was getting WhatsApp phone call again. So one of the things that they use is recruiters speaking to the young people, going to the high schools, and that's their way of communicating with that professionalism, with that network. Then they just have soldiers interacting with civilians as well, because a lot of the times when you have military members who are in a military branch, more than likely you'll also have family members who are also in the military as well. So it's building that as well. There's different ways of doing it. Then like you said, there's also the news media, there's the computers, there's everything else that goes along with it.
Is there anything that you would like to personally leave the viewers with that would either be kind of like a nice send off or something that you think would be genuinely beneficial for the average person?
Military is not for anybody. It's not for everybody. Less than 1% of the US population joins the military. And if you join for 4 years, decide you don't like it, that's okay. If your contract's for 3, that's okay. If you decide to do National Guard or reserves for the military branch and you want to be a weekend warrior, as we call them, that's okay too. And if you don't want to join, that's perfectly fine.
I think
But don't say you're not going to join because you would be one of those people to punch a drill sergeant. That is not a legit reason.
because they would punch a drill sergeant?
Yes, people have said, "Oh, I joined the military, but I'd punch a drill sergeant."
Because they have anger issues or they have ego?
No, because somebody's in their face yelling at them. And it's not even, they don't even have to yell at you. That's the thing. They don't even have to yell at you. Some of the scariest ones will pop up from behind you and just whisper right in your ear. And it's scary. I got goosebumps first time I heard it. I'm like, daggum, where did you come from?
I thank you actually for making that kind of your send-off statement, because not a lot of people know I actually considered joining a branch at one point, and then in my mind I was like, well, I actually do want to become a professional hypnotist, and that was my genuine passion. My initial thought was it'd be interesting to, as you put it, weekend warrior, join and then pop out at a quick date or time. And I remember some people would say, why didn't you do that? And I would say, honestly, part of me was just concerned. Like, I was concerned I wouldn't make it back. I was concerned I would die and I wouldn't get to live out my real passion. So it was kind of fear-based. And at one point I was like, what if I just provided hypnotherapy for the Army? And then they looked at me and said, you got to actually take basic training to understand the ideology they're in, the mindset they're in, the mentality they have, and what they'll actually be thinking and feeling when they come to you. So we would need to put you through basic training and then talk about it. So I don't know if that was a recruitment tactic or if they were like legitimate about that.
That is a recruitment tactic. We do see civilian providers about some of the issues that we face, but at the same time, a lot of people prefer to talking to somebody who was in the military or has that experience of basic training. But most of the time we see officers as well, and they prefer to talk to people who actually know what it's like as opposed to not. And some people just feel like I'd rather talk to a civilian because they'll actually understand or take me serious more. There's just different things that go along with that.
And I know that you've come to several virtual hypnosis shows. Now, that is kind of interesting because some of the phenomena that we've done in the past has worked very, very well for you. So that begs the question. One, thank you, by the way, for saying that's probably a tactic. Glad I avoided it, because obviously this is what I genuinely enjoy and am passionate about, want to continue with. But with everything we've said, do they know you're coming to these virtual shows, and or are you allowed to? And if so, why?
They do not know. And there is actually a regulation that does state what you are and not allowed to say, but a lot of it is just mostly already known or common sense. And if there is any secret information or top secret information, obviously that's not allowed to be discussed. And that's why I had to null and void some of those questions that you asked.